panicking. I cannot find my boyfriend, and it's making me panic. Our house is empty, and all his things are gone. When I say all, I mean all. I know what I'm saying is kind of absurd, but it's the truth. I don't know what to say to you all, but I'm not joking. I don't truly know where my boyfriend is, and it's making me very anxious. How does one explain that their partner just went missing? Well, I don't really think I can classify him missing yet. It's just too suspicious, and I'm just too clueless. Maybe, just maybe, I could be the reason for this. I might be at fault. How? Let me tell you guys what's going on. My name is Serena, and I'm a 24-year-old massage therapist. The name of my boyfriend is Nate, and we've been together for approximately 2 years now. We first met when I gave him a massage, and that was how our relationship began. It's been intense ever since then, and we got into each other so much that we decided to move in together. Nate is an accountant, and he's a very hardworking one. We decided to get an apartment together, and at first I was worried about the payment because the apartment was kind of expensive compared to the very cheap one I lived in before, but Nate insisted that we take the expensive apartment. Like I told you guys earlier, I'm a massage therapist, and that automatically means that I earn, but not as much as an accountant. LOL. I earn based on the number of massages I'm able to conduct. If I have a bad customer day, you can guess what happens, right? I wasn't ready to find a very expensive apartment, but Nate convinced me. If some of you are expecting me to say that Nate took over the bills himself, you're wrong. Nate is not like those men that believe a woman shouldn't spend a dime of her own money. I can very well say that Nate is a stingy man, but to him, he is not stingy. Instead, he believes that he's the perfect definition of a wise man. We split the bill on every single thing that involves the apartment. Sure, he gets me gifts and takes me out, but everything else is equally split. He doesn't believe in investing that much in a woman. He didn't tell me this himself, but I read it from the way he behaved. So if you're thinking that I caught a big fish by dating an accountant, you're wrong. Like I said, the apartment is outrageously expensive, so we didn't need to get furniture. It came with its own furniture. All we needed were our personal stuff that we wanted to add to the apartment. That's just my little introduction, guys. Let me get into the pressing problem that I need to get solved. I've honestly not slept for days because of this particular issue. I've had sleepless nights just thinking about what went wrong and why he suddenly left. At first, I tried my best to deny the truth. Yes, I had a little idea of what could have gone wrong, but I just didn't want to believe what I knew could be the reason. I still strongly believe that there's no way Nate could have found out I cheated on him. It was a one-time thing that just happened in the sour of the moment. He wasn't there, so I really do think that it can't be the reason why he suddenly left without notifying me. If you're wondering why I can't just call him, he blocked me. My boyfriend blocked me just like that, without prior notification that there was something going on. At first, I thought something had gone wrong, and I was at the verge of filing a missing persons report. But I had to pause that because I honestly believe that if something is wrong, he wouldn't have the time to properly pack his things and then block me. I know most of you are itching to know what I meant by saying I cheated on Nate. I'm itching to tell you all the truth, too. I don't know if that could be the reason why he suddenly ghosted me. I don't want to believe that's why, because that would mean my life is technically over. I cannot lose Nate now. It just can't happen. I love him. And even though my confession is coming a little bit late, it's the truth. I love him with all my heart, and I don't want to lose him. I cheated, and it wasn't something I planned. It just happened, and it means nothing. I need to go tell his family what's going on right now, so please bear with me, guys. I'll update this as soon as I can. Update 1. I'm back, guys. I know none of you kiss me, lol. Who would miss a pick-me girl, right? That's what kissed of you are calling me in the comments. I think it's a little bit rude, but whatever. I deserve it. I cheated with his boss, and that's not okay. But you guys are really brutal. Some of you actually went as far as calling me a 304. Are you serious? I cheated with his boss only. Nothing more. It's the first time I ever did something like that, and I truly regret it. I don't want to make this kind of mistake ever again. I went to see Nate's family, and that scenario was the most intense and dramatic thing I've ever experienced. I want to tell you all about it, but first of all, I'd like to tell you all how I ended up cheating with Nate's boss. I'm a massage therapist, and my work actually requires a lot of intimate encounters. Before you all get me wrong, I'll just tell you that I'm being honest. A massage therapist has to touch the clients and actually massage them, and it can get intimate sometimes, whether intentional or not. Only a professional can really control the narrative and make sure things don't get out of hand. If you're already guessing where this is going and you think I gave his boss a massage, then you're right. Nate has never been a fan of my job. In fact, he hates the fact that I'm a massage therapist. He doesn't like it at all. He never ceases to tell me this, and it's something I've heard many times before. I've always told him that it's not fair for him to talk down on my job when it was actually my job that led to us meeting. He came to get a massage at the place I work at, and I gave him a massage. He liked it a lot and came back a second time. He told me he got tired from working as an accountant a lot and needed to let off steam. Part of what I do as a massage therapist is helping my clients ease their stress. It gives me a very strong sense of satisfaction, and that's why I never stopped doing it. Nate and I bonded a lot during his sessions, and that's how we exchanged contacts and kicked it off. But because he was aware that sessions could get intimate, he began to get irritated with my job. I always assured him that I'm a professional and I'll not let myself get carried away. It was extremely hard to convince him because Nate is a very independent man. He doesn't get swayed easily. Have I told you guys about his nosy sister? His sister, Elena, hates me for what I do. She always accused me of cheating on him, but that's a story for another day. I never really met Nate's colleagues at work because I never really thought there was a need for that. He never brought it up, and I never brought it up because frankly we were both very busy at our respective workplaces. But just 3 weeks ago, Nate and I went to a party, and coincidentally, dope of his colleagues were there too. His boss at work was also there. Apparently it was his boss's birthday, and his colleagues decided to treat him to a nice birthday celebration. Nate wasn't part of it because I'd asked him to take me to a club days before that day, and he promised to take me. I had no idea his boss was having a birthday celebration that day. I felt really bad when I found out that it was his boss's birthday at the club, and I didn't waste any time before I apologized to him. I apologized to the whole group because I felt bad for being the reason the party had not been complete. I'm just like any lady who likes to make demands from her boyfriend and then forget he might have things to do. His colleagues laughed at Kai's apology and told me it was fine. To make me feel better, they even went as far as saying I was overacting. One of the reasons I also felt bad was because I remembered that when I first asked Nate, he told me he'd be his that day, but I refused to listen to him. Nate's boss introduced himself as Cole, and then he shared my hand and told me there was no need to apologize. He asked what I did for a living, and I said I was a massage therapist. From the moment those words slipped out, I could see that Nate was kind of angry. I didn't understand why he was angry at first, but I later remembered that he hated my job and probably felt uncomfortable with letting his colleagues know I was a massage therapist. His colleagues and boss, on the other hand, had the exact opposite reaction to what I said. They seemed very interested and intrigued, and they asked Nate why he didn't tell them of my profession earlier. Some of them made remarks that suggested they wanted to come for an appointment with me, but we all laughed it off, and I honestly assumed that they were all joking. I mean, why else would his own colleagues want to book an appointment with me? Nate didn't seem to feel that way, and I realized that from the way his body language suddenly changed. He became stiff and acted quite irritated. At some point, he called his colleagues out and told them to shut up. He told them to dead the idea of getting a massage from me. That was all that happened. When we got home, I confronted Nate and asked him why he overreacted. I honestly didn't see anything wrong with what his colleagues said, and I didn't get why he felt the need to overact like that. I didn't want to be the one responsible for conflict at his workplace. I mean, I was the only woman, I'm the kidst of boys. It's normal for some of them to get too excited and make funny comments. Nate made me understand that it was disrespectful to him, and he couldn't let it slide. I didn't say anything further because I didn't want to offend him. That was the end of the matter, and I wanted it to be that way. It was just a joke. That was the honest idea I had in my head, and I didn't let my mind travel elsewhere at all. That's why it was quite confusing for me when I realized that they are not actually joking. At least Cole was not joking at all. I was extremely surprised when I saw him at my workplace. It was not something I expected at all. I mean, YSL about plot twist, right? I heard Nate's colleagues making the jokes, but not once did Cole even comment on whatever they were saying. That's why he was the last person I expected at Key Workplace. If you're wondering how he knew where I was working at, I mentioned it at the club in my introduction. Before some of you come to the comments to call me a pick-me girl for doing that, let me make it clear that I was just trying to help myself and my company. We also work on commission, and if I saw a dozen men asking me where I worked, I'll call the name too. I'm not the only massage therapist working there. The other ones can massage them, and that's why I did what I did. So when I saw Cole, I walked up to him and asked what he was doing at KI place of work. I was genuinely intrigued and unwanted to know why he came there. He told me he had a stressful day at work and wanted to let off some steam. According to him, he'd never tried getting massaged by a professional before, and he thought it would be nice to stop by and give it a try. He told me he wanted to patronize the place I worked at, and that's why he came. Cole kind of caused some disruption at my workplace, and when I say disruption, I mean the good kind of disruption. He's a good-looking guy. In fact, he's very good-looking. I don't need to hide what I actually know is true. Some of my female friends were attracted to him, and they didn't hide it. But, unfortunately for them, they had other clients they were working on. I was the only one that was free. I tried getting out of it, but I would have lost my job if my boss or any of my seniors found out. I left a customer waiting when I had nothing to do. If just finished with a client and was the only available massage therapist. At first, I pulled Cole to the side and genuinely asked him to insist of waiting for the other massage therapists. But he told me he couldn't do that because he had to be somewhere urgently. I had no choice than to massage him. He left that day after giving me a $50 tip. I was surprised because that was a lot, and I even rejected it at first, but he insisted. When I got home that day, I couldn't bring myself to tell Nate that his boss had showed up to my workplace. What's worse, I gave him a massage. I knew that Nate would have lost his it and we would have gotten into an argument. I thought it was just a one-time thing, so I decided to keep it to myself. I also felt like there was no need to tell Nate because I was just going my job. As a professional, I didn't think there was anything wrong. I'm just doing what was required of me. I've been a massage therapist for a very long time, so I didn't think it was something that needed to make me feel nervous. 1 week later, I got yet another visit from Cole. It was surprising, but I had to do my job again. The only difference is that at the end of the day, Cole and I ended up going to his apartment. Yes, now you all can call me a pick-me girl or 304. Things escalated, and I did what I never imagined I'd do. It was very crazy, and I never imagined that things would escalate as much as it did. At first, it was just a normal session, but then I can't even bring myself to say the words out. We're not allowed to take things to another level during our sessions because it's greatly prohibited, so Cole invited me to his apartment. I got infatuated with his looks ad vaura, and then I got carried away with the way my colleges swooned over him. I think it's right to say that I let myself do something very stupid. We slept together, and I ended up cheating on Nate. I felt like a hinge bucket of ice water had suddenly been poured on me when everything was done. I realized that I'd cheated on my boyfriend with his boss. Yes, that crazy and stupid at the same time. At first, I wanted to tell Nate, but then I remembered that just the thought of giving his colleagues a massage had angered him. I had to ask myself how he'd react when he found out that I slept with his boss. No. I couldn't do it, so I decided to keep my mouth shut. Cole also told me to keep it a secret. He told me it was just a one-time thing, and I shouldn't feel scared of Nate finding out. He promised me he'd keep it a secret if I promised to keep it a secret too. Of course, I agreed to keep it a secret because there was no way I had any intention of revealing the truth to Nate. Who am I kidding? He would have left me that same day if I opened my big mouth and told him the truth. I knew who I was married to, and I was very well aware of the fact that Nate was a no-nonsense man. He's not what most ladies describe as a gentleman who is deeply in love. Nate uses his head more than his heart, and that's why when our rent is splittered. I knew I was not in a fairy tale relationship, so I didn't dare think I was a Disney princess that was irresistible and couldn't be dumped. I got home that day and acted as if nothing happened, even though I was going through a lot of guilt. I just tried my best to keep my cool and pretend like everything was fine. So, it was quite surprising for me when I came back home just 1 week ago and didn't see Nate. It was very weird. I was so lost in my guilt that I didn't even notice that Nate had started acting distant. I didn't even notice until right now as I'm writing this. I just got home that day and cooked dinner ahead of time like I always did. Nate usually came home hours after I did because he closed late from work. I waited for close to 7 hours and he didn't come home. Yes, I'm not joking. I got so shocked and worried that I started calling him, but that's when I discovered he had blocked me. I checked out bedroom hoping he'd kept a note for me, but there was nothing. The only thing I saw was the empty closet. I didn't even notice that his side of the closet had been empty before. Everything was gone. I thought I was going crazy, but no, it was true. I tried calling 2 of his phone numbers, but I was blocked on both. That's it, guys. He just ghosted me out of nowhere. For the first 5 days before I eventually decided to put this on Reddit, I didn't think it was because I'd cheated on him. I never imagined the possibility of him finding out that secret of mine. But when I wrote this on Reddit, I realized that there's every possibility he eventually found out the truth. If I still had doubts, his family cleared me up. I told you guys I went to see his family at the start of this update, right? Well, it didn't go well at all. So I went to see Nate's family so I could tell them what was going on. It was already 5 days and I didn't hear anything from Nate, so I thought it was right to speak to his family. I didn't want to speak to them before because I didn't want to raise alarms, but things had gotten out of hand and I thought it would be important to let his family know. Well, his family literally gave me the shock of my life. They were so cold and unwelcoming that I almost ran away the moment I stepped foot in their house. I told you guys his sister hated me, right? Well, she liked the opportunity when she discovered that I'd messed up cheating on Nate. Yes, she was aware. I didn't need to tell them I cheated before they knew. All I said was he was kidding from the house and I couldn't reach him on his phone. But they already seemed to be aware that Nate and I were no longer in contact with each other. It felt like they'd even been expecting me in the first place. His sister called me a lose girl and told me she always warned Nate that dating a massage therapist was only going to lead him into deep regret. She called me a woman with no real job and asked me to leave their house. I tried talking to Nate's mother and asking her to tell me if Nate spoke to them, but she also seemed to hate me. When his little sister and brother didn't spare me a second of their time. I was sent out of the house just like that with no progress on where my boyfriend is. Even though I now know that Nate is aware of my cheating scandal, I can't help but ask myself, where is my boyfriend? Update 2. I don't have a boyfriend. I've been dumped. I'm single. I guess you all saw this coming, right? I'm sure it's not something that cuts across as a surprise to some of you. I had it coming, and I guess I was aware of that all along. But I chose to pretend like reality wasn't setting in at all. If you're wondering what finally brought my karma, I did that myself. I suspected that Nate was back to his former apartment because it just didn't make sense that his family knew about what happened without him when confronting me. I knew that meant he didn't go far and had to be in town. I went to his old apartment, and I bumped into him just before he left for work in the morning. Thankfully, I knew the exact time he left for work. I never considered going to his workplace because I didn't want to be embarrassed by seeing his boss and colleagues who already know what happened. Nate was very cold towards me, and he was extremely rude. He didn't give me time to speak. He just told me it's over and that he was done with the relationship. According to him, he couldn't date someone that cheated in him with his boss. I pleaded for him to tell me how he found out, and it turns out he had some of my colleagues at work keep an eye on me. After Cole's birthday celebration at the club, where some of his colleagues voiced their interest in getting a massage by me, he asked some of the people he was familiar with at my working place to tell me if something fishy happened. You guys remember that Nate was a regular at my workplace before, right? That's how we met, so he had friends there before. They were the ones that told him that I massaged Cole twice and also left work with him. I guess I was really sloppy to have forgotten that everyone knew me as a married woman and to have also introduced Cole to my colleagues as my husband's boss. Apparently, Nate confronted Cole 3 days after he got the information, and he recorded Cole's answer. Cole foolishly told him the truth after Nate tried threatening him and intimidating him. Nate then went ahead to report Cole to the HR department before he packed his things and left the apartment. If you're wondering why he didn't just tell me to pack out, it's because our rent was already due. He didn't want to renew it, so he left. I foolishly renewed it with some of my savings 3 days after Nate ghosted me because I thought he'd eventually come back. So yeah, I'm broke living in an expensive apartment by myself. Let me not forget to add, single. After Nate told me everything, he warned me never to contact me again. Just yesterday, I got from a friend of mine that after Nate reported Cole to the HR department, Cole denied his allegations. The HR then summoned both of them again, and that's when Nate provided the recording of Cole admitting to sleeping with me. I told you guys, Nate uses his head all the time, right? He intentionally refused to give the evidence at first because he was very sure that Cole would deny everything. If he had just accepted, the HR would have either asked him to apologize or asked him to stay off work for some weeks. But since he first lied to them, and then he was proven guilty with evidence later, he was demoted to a lower department because his behavior was tagged to be triggering and prone to disrupt work productivity and a peaceful working environment. I heard Cole couldn't take the shame of getting demoted, so he resigned to save his ego. Well, that's none of my business because I guess both of us got what was coming for us. Even though I hate myself right now and I regret my bad choices, I'm happy Nate got his justice and didn't have to keep working with the man that slept with his girlfriend. I'm deeply sorry for causing him that shame and embarrassment, and I regret my actions every single day. But I guess it is what it is. A simple suggestion led to my husband divorcing me. I didn't end up doing what I was thinking, but I had to pay for it. Maybe I should have given it a deep thought before telling him, and now am being served divorce papers. I never thought that suggesting to open our marriage would not sit well with my husband. I thought he also had the same idea, but I never knew we were far apart. My name is Jessica. I am a 26-year-old fashion designer. The name of my husband is Fred, and he is a 29-year-old banker. My husband and I have been together for 3 years now. My husband and I met at a family function that my mother hosted. I was invited to attend that function since I designed most of the dresses worn by the ladies. I loved my work, and my mother was very proud of me. I didn't exactly like going to those kinds of parties because my mother was always trying to match me with somebody. On that faithful day, I met my husband Fred, talking to my mother, and like every other day, I didn't even look his way. I quickly spoke to my mother and left before she could introduce us. On my way running out of the event at some point, I ran into Gabrielle. Gabrielle was such a lovely woman. I met her through my mother and I had made some dresses for her. She was always very kind to me and she supported my work. I respected Gabrielle a lot, and that was why I followed her when she pulled me back into the event. She kept on talking about how her grandson is sweet and all, and at some point I had to tune her out. I thought it was time for me to leave when she pulled me across the hall to where my mother was standing talking to a man. Gabrielle introduced him as his grandson Fred, and at that moment I was very much interested because Fred is a very handsome man. Fred and I got talking, and he told me about what he did for a living, and he complimented me about my work, which I was grateful for. Fred and I exchanged numbers, and from there we started speaking. At that point, I did want to be in a relationship because I had just left one which was not very good. Fred had assured me he was not like every other guy, and I believed him. Fred took me out on dates, which I was very happy with. He was very attentive to me, and I loved that. Things were going smoothly, and at some point Fred asked me to be his girlfriend, and I accepted. I was skeptical about it because I genuinely loved Fred, and I knew he loved me too. While we dated, I discovered that Fred had lost his mother at a very early age, and he was raised by his grandmother, Gabrielle. I got to meet his whole family. His grandmother, who he adored so much, was his everything, and she approved of our relationship. A few months later, Fred and I got married in a very beautiful way. I could say that I was totally in love. We bought a house together and we moved in together. Our marriage was beautiful at some point, and we were the ideal couple. We went out on regular dates, went on vacations, attended so many functions and parties together. Our lives were moving perfectly and felt surreal. Of course, we had different arguments from time to time, but we always found our way back to each other. We didn't really stay mad at each other for long and had our ways of settling each argument. A year into our marriage, things began to change. I started traveling a lot for my work, and I didn't have time. Fred also got promoted, and most times he was not at home. It was as if everything was not in our favor. Whenever I had time to spare before a trip, Fred could be in another state, but we made sure to find time, even if it was an hour in those days, to spend together. It got worse at some point that we didn't see each other for over 6 months. Sure, we talked on the phone and made video calls, but it was different. I was busy creating my designs one day when Gabrielle worked into my office like every other day. I thought it was going to be a very good afternoon with her talking about random things, but it wasn't. I felt like everything started from there. She scolded me about not being present in my marriage and how I was neglecting my house and all. I decided to make her understand that I wasn't neglecting my duties as a wife and that Fred has been busy with work. And she told me that Fred had complained to her that I am no longer available at home and that work had taken most of my time. I was shocked to hear that because it was Fred, who I had not seen in a couple of weeks. I knew we went 6 months without seeing each other, but after that, I decided it was not going to happen again, and I hired more people to work for me in order for me to spend more time with my husband. And so, when Gabrielle was talking to me about what Fred had said, I was disappointed. I made Gabrielle understand what was going on, but she didn't want to see things from my own perspective. I understood how much she meant to Fred, and that's why I decided to let her go on and on about what she didn't really understand. When Gabrielle left, I was so angry because I felt like if by chance Fred and I had issues in our relationship, he shouldn't talk to his grandmother first, but to me, his wife, in order for us to solve the problem. After a few days, Fred returned from his trip, and I decided to talk to him about his grandmother's visit, to which he apologized, and said at that time he didn't know what to do. And we hadn't seen each other for 6 months, and he needed to speak to someone. I understood what he meant, and we decided to resolve our issues and cut back the hours we were working in order for us to have enough time for each other. Fred began to work less, and I also did the same. We started coming back home to each other early. I started cooking dinners for us, we hung out with friends, and it was as if we started dating again. During the next couple of months, we celebrated Fred's birthday. It was celebrated in grand style. I trusted Gabrielle to take such things to the next level. We also invited friends and colleagues. It was indeed beautiful. A year later, and we were back to where things were. We were working more now, and we saw each other. We could only meet during Thanksgiving and Christmas dinners, and at that point I felt like we were drifting apart. I hardly saw Fred, which I was not happy about. At some point, I started thinking that maybe he was seeing someone else. I didn't want to think too much into it, and I decided to take my mind off things. I was busy with work when my mother came to visit me. She complained about not seeing me in months, and I had to explain to her that I had been occupied. She had asked about Fred, to which I explained things to her. My mother was a typical housewife who didn't understand the need for a woman to work if her husband was providing for her. That's why she was always responsible for putting together events for my father when he was alive, and that had been her thing today. But I didn't want to be a mere housewife who was responsible for taking care of events. I wanted to make a name for myself. I knew she was not going to understand, so I let it be. Apart from me being in love with Fred at that moment, she contributed to me marrying Fred. She kept going on and on about how I was too successful, and I should be grateful I saw a man who was willing to marry me. I knew she meant well, but that wasn't me. I had always wanted to work for my own money. My mother left my store, and I received a call from Gabrielle saying she would like to see me and my husband Fred in 2 days' time, and that it was very urgent. I didn't know what was going on, and so I said I should call Fred. I called him, but it went straight to voicemail. I knew he had been avoiding my calls, but I thought I had given him some heads up concerning what his grandmother had said. I wondered what she could possibly have to tell us. I hoped she was not sick because she meant a lot to Fred and that could break him. I thought to myself, and I didn't know what to do when it was time to go see Gabrielle because I still haven't got hold of Fred. I decided to go there and explain things to her. But on getting there, I saw Fred talking and laughing with his grandmother. I was very shocked. Fred came back and didn't think to return my calls or even come back home. And to make matters worse, he was behaving like we were not having issues in front of his grandmother. That threw me off balance. He was portraying a happy family in front of his grandmother, and we didn't see each other for weeks. I decided to have a talk with him when we were left alone, and he had told me that he didn't want to disappoint his grandmother and that I should play along. I asked him why he ignored my calls and decided not to answer me. I felt at that point Fred had changed. He was not the person I married. I knew we had been busy and all, but that can't possibly drive a rift between us, right? Gabrielle returned, and she sat down and we began talking. Immediately, I asked if she was sick, but she responded she wasn't. The reason she called us was because Fred and I had been married for 3 years now without children. I felt taken back. I looked at Fred and he looked indifferent. Before I could understand what was going on, Gabrielle started crying, saying she was getting old and she needed to see her grandchildren before she died. I was about to explain to her that it cannot be possible right now when Fred interrupted me and said, "We could give her what she wants." At that moment, I felt like crying because my husband was not listening to me, and he was promising Gabrielle something we should have discussed as a couple instead of him taking the decision on his own. I looked at Gabrielle and she was very happy. I wanted to speak with Fred, but he left saying he needed to attend to something. Few hours later, I left Gabrielle's house. While I was on my way home, I thought about everything, and I was very sad. I got home and I saw that Fred was at home. I decided to confront him about what had happened, but he said he was going to make his grandmother happy, whether I liked it or not, and I tried to explain to him that we can't bring a child into our midst because we barely had time for ourselves, and that a child could complicate things. I told him that we should really explain things to Gabrielle, to which he bluntly refused. Fred seemed not to listen to me at that moment. All he cared about was how to grant his grandmother wishes and also to make her happy. I'm not against birthing a child, not at all. I just didn't want my child to lack attention from us. And also, I didn't want my child to be left in the hands of a nanny. The fact that Fred didn't understand me at that moment made me very upset, and we ended up in a heated argument. He didn't see things from my own perspective, and I think I also didn't understand where he was coming from. Yes, every couple would literally want to have a child, but in our case, we barely had time for each other, and so bringing in a child at that time was a very bad idea. Truly, I wasn't ready to quit my job, and so also Fred wasn't ready either. I didn't have a problem working, but I have a problem staying at home doing nothing. I didn't want to be a full-time housewife that would always stay at home watching TV and doing house chores. I'm not trying to condemn those that are full-time housewives. Honestly, it is not a bad thing to be a full-time housewife, but that life is not for me. I love my career with passion, and I like putting a smile on my clients' faces. I wanted to also put a smile on Gabriella and my family. But it seemed like I wasn't doing enough, because I literally did try to make them happy, most especially Gabriella. Weeks went by, and Gabriella constantly reminded us about wanting to see her grandchildren. And so one day, I called my husband and told him that we really need to settle this issue of having a child. Of course, he didn't feel the heat like I had felt back then because everyone thought I was the problem. Fred was guilty, in fact, we both were guilty, but he made it look as if I was the problem. So Fred and I talked on the phone, and I asked him if he would be home the coming weekend so we could patch things out. He told me to give him about 30 minutes so that he could get back to me and that he was in a meeting. I agreed and we ended the call. After getting off the phone with my husband, I picked my bag and headed home. It was time for me to close for the day, so I went home and hoped that my husband would keep to his promise and return the call. I arrived home and met an empty house as usual. I had my shower and changed into my pajamas. I was about heading to the kitchen to fix something for dinner when my husband called. He apologized for not keeping to the time. We asked ourselves how our day went, and I asked about the meeting he had that day, if everything went okay, and he responded positively. I asked him if he could come back that weekend so we could talk things out, most especially the child aspect, and he assured me that he was going to come. We talked about a few things on the phone before we ended the call. I went ahead and had my dinner and watched my regular TV night shows before I retired to bed for the night. World Cup the next day very early and headed home. Apparently, one of my good clients had booked to be styled for a photo shoot, so I left home before 5 a.m. I went to the client house with my crew members and all the equipment we needed to carry out our job. It was a birthday photo shoot, and we needed to deliver effectively. At the photo shoot, I met my old schoolmate, Becca. I was a year older than Becca, and also a year ahead of her when we were in college. It was a mutual friendship, and Becca seemed calm back then in school. I asked her what she was doing in the studio, and she said the lady I was styling at that moment was her cousin's sister. She just came around to her cousin's sister with a couple of things. She also told me that she had no idea that I was the stylist that always styled her cousin. She complimented on my style of fashion and hoped to be like me someday. I felt so happy, and at that moment I was very proud of myself for being able to put this through all by myself. It was a proud moment for me, guys. LOL. Becca and I chatted for a long time while I left my crew members to work. I usually left my clients with my crew members because I also wanted them to learn. And so, I gave them a chance to represent me, which they often deliver effectively. Becca and I talked a lot about school, businesses, and personal life. I really enjoyed conversing with Becca. I was so engrossed in the conversation that I literally forgot what I came there to do at first. I also showed her the work I had done and a few other things. And so, guys, I really had a nice time with Becca. 30 minutes later, we all were set to leave and bade ourselves farewell. Becca and exchanged contacts and got in touch with each other. I and my crew members headed straight to the store and continued our daily routine. It was at that time my phone rang, and it was my husband calling. He called to tell me that he would be coming back home the next day. I got off the phone and continued with what I was doing. So guys, the next morning, I didn't go to work because it was on a Saturday. I don't normally work on weekends because I decided to limit my workload. That day, my husband was expected to come back home, and so I waited for him. Few hours later, Fred arrived home, and I welcomed him as usual. I wanted him to have a rest before telling him what I had in mind. He went and freshened up, and a few minutes later, he came down to have lunch. I went to the sitting room to continue watching my movie. Fred later came over to where I was seated and asked me what was so important that I had to call him over to discuss. He told me he was curious to know, and he paid attention to me. At that moment, I didn't know how to put it out to him because I'd gotten so furious. Somehow I mustered the courage and told him we should open up our marriage since we barely see each other or spend time together. We would still be a couple, and our families don't need to know about it. I also told him I wasn't ready to have a child just yet because we both don't have time, and I wasn't ready to be a full-time mom. I wanted to concentrate more on my career until I was ready. Immediately I said that. Fred yelled at me and almost gave me a slap. He was shocked and at the same time looked at me in utmost disgust. I saw through his eyes that he was really disappointed in me. Fred left my side and went inside the room. In that state of anger, Fred broke a lot of valuables and even broke our wedding pictures. I tried to calm him down, but he didn't listen. I ran out of the house because I didn't want Fred to harm me. So guys, I told Fred about my suggestion and he got really mad. I haven't seen Fred that mad ever since we were together. Maybe I woke up the beast in him. Update. Hi guys, I have gone through all of you guys' comments and I really appreciate it. I have also seen the hateful comments and truly, I deserve all of that. Let me get straight to the point. So guys, I ran out of the house in fear because I had never seen my husband that mad before. I went to my mom's house to explain what had happened. Honestly, she was really disappointed in me. I explained to her about how Fred and I weren't that couple we always portrayed whenever we were in the family gathering. At that point, she didn't stop reminding me of how she was irritated by my own foolish suggestion. The following day, I got a call from Gabrielle. At that point, I already knew that my husband had already told her about it. I couldn't pick the phone because I was very ashamed of myself. I got up that morning with swollen eyes. Apparently, I had cried all through the night after thinking about what I had suggested to my husband. I thought he also wanted to open it up since things were not like before. So I didn't pick the call and didn't return it back either. It had been 10 hours since I had left home, and my husband didn't call me. He switched his lines so I wouldn't be able to reach out to him. Just when I was about to leave the bed, I got a knock on my door. I didn't answer, and after a while, the person opened the door and came in. It was my mom. She sat down on the bed and told me Fred had sent something for me. I got up in the hope that maybe he wanted to see me. I got curious as to why he had to send me a package. I opened it and found out that it was divorce papers. I couldn't believe my eyes. My mom hugged me and patted me to stop crying. The divorce papers were already signed by Fred. I was left to sign it. My husband knew I would come see him after seeing the divorce papers, and so he traveled out of town that very day. He instructed our family lawyer to come back the next day to collect the papers after I had signed it. So, 2 days later after Fred left town, I signed the divorce papers and handed it over to the lawyer. It was a tough decision, but I had to make it because there was nothing I could do to change his mind. Update. Guys, it has already been months since my husband and I both went our separate ways. I moved out of my mom's house and managed to get a place to stay. I didn't want to go back and start staying with her. I wanted to be independent and have my own place. Fred moved on, and he never spoke to me since the last time I ran out of the house. I also have moved on with my life. I want to try and put my life together and also try out new things. Most times, I usually go to my store and get myself busy so as to make me forget all that has happened in the last few months. Gabrielle never called back ever since I ignored her call. I know I must have really hurt her, but I guess she wouldn't want to see my face again. So guys, this is my story. I hope you all have learned something from this. I hope none of you would make the same mistake I made. I should have never told my husband that. I guess this was a lesson well learnt.